Looks like the lesbian space witches only had the power of one season.
I've kind of lost control of Star Wars, so it's going off in a different path than what I intended. But the first 6 are very much mine and my philosophy.
It's been months since the Acolyte got the axe, but instead of owning up to the disaster, Disney and its loyal defenders are working overtime to rewrite history. They want fans to believe the show was some kind of success, despite the mountain of evidence proving otherwise. But one man isn't falling for their corporate spin: GeorgeLucas himself. From the very moment the Acolyte was announced, controversy surrounded it. Marketed as a bold new take on Star Wars, it quickly became clear that the show had less to do with storytelling and more to do with pushing an agenda. Fans weren't having it. They rejected it outright. And despite Disney's desperate attempts to keep it afloat, the show crashed and burned in spectacular fashion. But now, some media outlets and even the show's actors are trying to rewrite history, claiming The Acolyte was a hit. Lucas isn't buying it, and neither should you. Despite the show being a financial and critical disaster, Disney-friendly media sites like Collider and Inverse are spinning wild narratives, boldly declaring that The Acolyte was a success. Some even argue that Disney made a huge mistake by canceling it. They're trying to frame this flop as an underrated triumph. But fans know the truth. The Acolyte bombed, and no amount of media spin can change that.
There's no original thinking. Those big studios, they don't want that. They want something that is like something they've seen.
Hashtag The Acolyte getting canceled because incels couldn't handle a sexy black girl and a sexy Asian man serving evil, villainous romance.
But the truth? Far less flattering. Some reports tried to paint The Acolyte as one of the most watched Star Wars series on Disney+, but let's be real, that's like bragging about being the tallest building in a ghost town. Disney+ had a disastrous year, with original content struggling across the board. Even if The Acolyte managed to rank among the top Star Wars shows of 2024, what was it really competing against? Other underperforming, forgettable series? The entire platform was experiencing a downward spiral, with subscribers losing interest in Disney's content as a whole. And then there's the viewership spin. Supporters of The Acolyte proudly waved around the 2.7 billion minutes watched as so-called proof of success, but what they conveniently left out was the context. Compared to past Star Wars shows, or even average Netflix originals, this number was laughably low. Take The Mandalorian Season 3, for example. Despite being heavily criticized as one of the weakest seasons, it crushed The Acolyte, pulling in over 6.5 billion minutes in just 12 weeks. Even Andor, a show that struggled to connect with audiences, easily outperformed it. The reality is simple. Disney had no choice but to pull the plug. The Acolyte was a financial black hole, a show that lost money, lost fans, and ultimately had to be put out of its misery. No amount of media spin can change that fact.
Every new Star Wars show should have an audience of 0. Every new Star Wars film should make $0 at the box office.
Gotti says, so this is how creativity dies, with thunderous applause.
No matter how much the media spins it, or how loud the social media activists get, numbers don't lie. If The Acolyte had truly been a hit, Disney, the same company that milks every franchise for every last dollar, would have jumped at the chance for another season. Instead, they cut their losses and ran, proving once and for all that The Acolyte was nowhere near the success its defenders claim. And the official data? It's brutal. Luminate, a respected industry tracking firm, lays it all out. The Acolyte suffered a massive drop in viewership after just 2 episodes. Audience interest collapsed, and by the season finale, almost nobody was watching. Even shows that were considered underwhelming, like Andor and the Book of Boba Fett, performed far better. For perspective, The Mandalorian Season 3, despite being widely criticized for its weaker storyline, still pulled in 6.5 billion minutes watched in just 12 weeks. The Acolyte, after 6 whole months, barely crawled to 2.7 billion. That's less than half the viewership of a show that fans already called a disappointment. At the end of the day, the truth is clear. The Acolyte flopped, and no amount of damage control can change that.
Everyone's celebrating The Acolyte getting canceled. I will place a curse on your entire bloodline.
The whole franchise is owned by feminists and left-wing activists, people who hate the audience and hate the material that they've been entrusted with.
Even Ahsoka, with half the budget of The Acolyte, still managed to crush it with over 4 billion minutes watched. Meanwhile, The Acolyte not only flopped, but burned through a massive budget, costing significantly more than most of the shows it's being compared to. One of the favorite talking points of Acolyte defenders is that it was one of the most watched Disney Plus originals of 2024. But here's what they won't tell you: 2024 was one of Disney Plus's worst years ever. The platform suffered a major drop in engagement, declining subscriber numbers, and a string of underperforming original series. The Acolyte wasn't up against blockbuster hits, it was barely outperforming other flops like Agatha All Along and Echo, both of which were massive failures for Marvel Studios. In any other year, The Acolyte's numbers wouldn't even be worth mentioning. If anything, its embarrassing failure is just another sign of how far Disney has fallen. The company's inability to produce must-watch content is becoming more obvious with every new release. Not long ago, Star Wars projects were pop culture juggernauts. Every new series or film was an event. Now, Disney is struggling to keep fans interested, and The Acolyte is just the latest proof of their downfall.
There is no conceivable incentive for anyone to watch any Star Wars content again. Like, I'm not even asking you to boycott.
I gotta be real with you. Creativity died at Disney a very, very long time ago.
So now, shows like The Acolyte come and go without making a dent, struggling to capture even a fraction of the excitement that once defined the Star Wars franchise. According to insiders, this isn't just about one bad show. It's about Disney's entire mishandling of Star Wars ever since they got their hands on it. And George Lucas. He's had enough. While he's mostly stayed quiet on Disney's creative choices, those close to him say he's frustrated by what he sees as a complete betrayal of the storytelling principles that made Star Wars great. Insiders reveal that Lucas specifically points to The Acolyte as the perfect example of everything wrong with Disney's approach. Instead of honoring the mythology he carefully built, The Acolyte tossed Star Wars lore aside, replaced beloved storytelling elements with shallow narratives, and prioritized identity politics over real storytelling. Disney continues to push its own modern messaging at the expense of the core themes that made Star Wars resonate with generations of fans. Sources say Lucas is especially frustrated with how Disney has handled key Star Wars eras, stripping away the heart, the depth, and the magic that once made the franchise unstoppable.
I disliked the business of Hollywood intensely. When I had that choice of Star Wars being a success, I said, I'm going to try to make a go for it. And so
The High Republic era, which The Acolyte tried and failed to explore, was supposed to be a golden age of the Jedi, a time of wisdom, adventure, and expansion. Instead, the show completely butchered that vision, depicting the Jedi as incompetent, confused, and unlikable, a far cry from the noble warriors they were meant to be. This rewriting of Star Wars history, Lucas has had enough. Insiders say that